if you like, outright animosity and diabolical machinations against Iran over several decades since 1979. They've yet given them an opportunity, and again, all that the Americans prove is that you can't basically trust any treaty that they make with you. It's not worth the paper it's written on. And Ayatollah Khamenei has emphasized this to be a thought process within the Iranian political mechanism as well, that actually you've got to have wisdom and you've got to understand who you're dealing with. If the Americans are to prove worthy signatories of any treaty, first of all, they've got to put forward all the credentials they can to convince Iran now that actually they mean what they say and they're going to do what they say. And that would mean making massive concessions in terms of all of the economic terrorism, the sanctions that they've imposed on Iran and the rest.
Well, yeah, your take, you've heard Sid Mohsen just talk about economic terrorism. I want to start from there and looking at that aspect and dealing with this economic terrorism. Ayatollah Khamenei has said that the young people in this country has actually turned that hardship into opportunity, and he talked about the development and the invention of so many of the needs of the country that's now being taken care of domestically.
Yes, actually, the speech of the leader in the beginning of the year is a kind of official announcement for the Iranian authorities, for the all parties in Iran to accept it. So what the leader today highlighted regarding to the sanction and the next step regarding the JCPOA shows that Iranian policy in future, how would it be? And what was very important point and the key point in the speech of the leader was that we don't the commitment on the paper. What we look is we want to see on the in the action. And what during this case took place regarding to Iran is that day by day we saw the sanction. One of the important points in this case was that even in the COVID, by the COVID, we saw that even the mask was forbidden and was included under the sanctions against the Iranian. And what today we see regarding to the sanction against Iran, it is humanitarian. And if we, one of the important points also in the speech of the leader was that it is not the point to say that who has to start, who has to be the beginner. The important point is that we all have to confirm our action, our commitment to the JCPOA.
Okay. Sid Mohsen, when we look at the situation, as you had said earlier, that even prior to, of course, the JCPOA, going back historically with the United States and basically not keeping their commitments, your prognosis of where this is going at this point. I mean, the leader has shown skepticism time and time again and said, of course, from the very beginning that he did not think that they would abide by it. And even now, he is skeptical that they won't. But, of course, still saying that if they basically take away all unilateral sanctions, cancel all unilateral sanctions, in practice, still, Iran is willing to return to fulfill all of its commitments under the JCPOA if the United States returns and does what it's supposed to do. Your perspective in general about this, are you skeptical that this is going to happen, that the United States will actually cancel all the unilateral sanctions on Iran, or your overall perspective on this?
I'm hugely skeptical about that. The fact is that the Americans have a very clear target in terms of their strategic dialogue with Iran. The first is that the Islamic Republic of Iran should not be a regional power. It should have no influence in the region that rivals theirs or Israel. That's number one. Number two is they do not want the Islamic Republic of Iran to have a defense capability which prevents Israel and themselves bullying and dominating in an oppressive way that region in order to resource rape. Of course, they also don't want the Islamic Republic of Iran to be a success because the lie of democracy which they've sold around the world is actually, of course, we all know, an imperialistic totalitarianism, only not in so many obvious, if you like, words. But Iran offers potentially an alternative because the Islamic Republic of Iran hasn't gone to war with anybody in its region or as an offensive, war over 200 years. They have a long history of cultural, literary, political, and other benefits that they've given to the entire West Asian region over the history. And of course, the most important thing for the Americans and the Israelis is that the Islamic Republic of Iran has an ideology, a political ideology and philosophy based on a moral outlook, one which diametrically opposes American imperialism, Israeli imperialism. That they know perfectly well they can never really have treaties that they can abide with Iran because they fundamentally differ in terms of their moral principles politically. And Iran is going to be a thorn in their side. Until they remove that thorn, as far as they're concerned, they cannot rest. So I really don't see any, I don't see any reason for the Americans to come to a genuine agreement with Iran, other than through fear and through the power of Iran and through its own self-sustainability, which it's achieving. And Ayatollah Khamenei hinted at this. He said very clearly, rely on yourselves. Start building those scientific, technological, agricultural, economic self-sustainability. Turn to the East. China and Russia are offering friendship in terms of economic and other aid as well. Don't rely on the Americans. This kind of obsession that you have to get the ratification of America, it must end, because it's a sort of a neo-colonialist mindset which may still exist in some circles. It will not give you any benefits, just as it's not giving you any benefits over the last 4 decades.
And with that, I appreciate both of you being with us. Said Mohsen Abbas, journalist and political commentator out of London, and Yahya Jahangiri, international lecturer out of Zanjan. Moving on to other news this hour. Yemeni army spokesman Yahya Saadi says Saudi Arabia has launched more than 260,000 airstrikes on his country since it began its war in 2015. Saadi said the Yemeni army, in response, has conducted over 12,000 operations against Saudi Arabia. He said over 10,000 Saudi-backed forces have been killed or injured as a result. The Yemeni army spokesman also said his country conducted at least 1,300 ballistic missile attacks against Saudi targets. He said the army will continue to defend Yemen until the Saudi aggression comes to an end. Riyadh began its war on March 26, 2015. The UN says more than 250,000 Yemenis have died so far, most of them from indirect causes such as starvation. And now to Germany, where the chancellor there, Angela Merkel, is seeking to extend COVID-19 restrictions into April after infections jump due to new variants of the virus. The German government is also considering making all people returning from abroad face quarantine and compulsory coronavirus tests. The measures will be discussed on Monday. Public fatigue over lockdown measures now in their 4th month is growing in Germany. On Saturday, arrests were made as some 20,000 people gathered in the city of Kassel to protest the restrictions. Police deployed water cannons and used pepper spray to disperse protesters. They fought back, hitting officers with projectiles. Germany is one of the hardest-hit European nations by the pandemic. Myanmar's coup leader says the main duty of the armed forces is to defend the country against external threats. General Min Aung Hlaing made the comment as he visited the armed forces on the strategically important Coco Island. The remarks come as international pressure is growing on Myanmar junta to stop its crackdown on anti-coup protesters. The junta, however, has remained defiant. as protests continue. On Sunday, a man was killed and several others wounded in the central town of Manila. Police opened fire on a group of